Oh. Pia. Are we live? Let's find out. Can you check if we're live, Huia?
Not really.
Hello. Okay. Well, we should. It's recording, so let's start. It is live. We did it. Hooray. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the MPG Rock and Metal Production Masterclass Chitty Chat thing. I'm Chris, one of the MPG helpers. I've got Huia in the background checking out stuff. And we got our guest tonight, which is Corey Friedlander. Hi, Corey. And
how's it going?
Yeah, Troy Kelly and
everyone.
Zorran Mendonsa and Dave
Hello.
Johnston, who all have lots of skills that they can talk about. So we'll start off first with going through a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to start in reverse order. So Dave, do you want to unmute your mic and let us know a bit about you, what you've done in rock and metal production, and yeah, just a quick, blurb.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here amongst this group of talented people. And just a real quick bit about me. So I'm a drummer and do backing vocals in a band called Villainy, which we're just finishing up a tour at the moment with Devilskin. We've been playing around the whole country, and we've been together for sort of 15 odd years now, and we've made 3 albums and a couple of EPs, and we're just kind of in the early stages now of whatever our next chapter is going to be. So we've got a lot of writing to do. We made the first 3 albums with a producer called Tom Larkin from Shihad. He's the drummer of Shihad, and so across 3 albums worth of that, I know Corey's worked with Tom as well. There was a lot of learning, both from the perspectives of being a musician and then also as someone who's really into production and mixing and things like that. I was soaking up a lot of those experiences along the way there, and I've also worked with several other producers and studio people, both from that musician side of things and also as a producer and as a mixing engineer myself. And so I also work at SAE Creative Media Institute, so I'm one of the lecturers there, so sort of across a whole bunch of areas, and also work in production with other artists in sort of pop and electronic music as well. So I'm always kind of bringing ideas across different genres in my productions and stuff like that. So that's a little bit about me to start off with, but yeah, pass it off to the next person.
Okay, do you want to go, Zorran?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Really nice to be here this evening. I've been recording, producing, engineering for about 20 years now, and always been out of a sort of home studio situation. And of course, worked in many other studios as well, but most of my own work has been out of my home studio. And yeah, that's really it. Some notable works are Pull Down the Sun, The Shepherd's Reign, who I know Corey's good friends with at the minute as well, and a bit of Devilskin in the early days as well. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Cool. Do you want to go, Troy, now?
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Kelly. I own the Armory down here in Wellington. My background comes from being a musician. I moved to Wellington in the late 90s and studied at the Jazz Conservatorium down here. And then I started working with bands, producing them, and it's just evolved over the last 25 years now to owning a commercial studio here in Wellington that works with everyone from independent unsigned artists right through to international touring artists and acts that come to town. I have a sweet spot for anything heavy. I think it's an occupational hazard. So I've produced, engineered, mixed and mastered albums for everyone from Bullet Bow, Blindfolded and Led to the Woods, Carnal, Organectomy, a lot of thrash and technical death metal, a lot of hardcore. So yeah, just have a lot of fun with the heavy stuff, which is why we're here.
Nice. Okay, your turn, Corey.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey Friedlander, and it's a real pleasure to be on this panel with these amazing other producers. What a team. Anyway, about me, I pretty much got into the technical metal drumming, tried to be in as many bands as I could, did a lot of studio stuff as well as a lot of tours. But my main big things that I achieved was working with the producers such as Sylvia Massy, also Tom Larkin, Forrester Saville, Zorran himself, Scott Seawright, Clint Murphy. I've worked a lot with Chris. Thanks a lot, Chris. But yeah, I mean, it was a thing that most of us do. You know, we get into production eventually. That wasn't my first thing, but I tried to study under a lot of people, tried to get good at EDM. And what I do now is just try and combine all my techniques and pretty much trying to work with a lot of bands and artists, trying to do as many genres as I can with my own studio core focus productions, just in St. Luke's. That's me.
Cool. Okay, so I suppose we might as well go. We had a chat, all one-on-one. I did with you all, and we came up with a whole load of points we thought might be interesting for people. So I was going to start off with a couple of ones. Maybe Troy can start on this. What does a producer actually bring to the table? How do they accelerate a band's career? As you said, from chaos to clarity. And then if you guys can all chime in on some stuff as well.
Sure. So, what does a producer actually bring to the table? It's a really good question because every band I've ever talked to has a completely different understanding or a completely different idea of what that could possibly mean. And some of the things I've heard of, not without sounding too awful towards the band, sometimes you just have to laugh. I've heard everything from why would we get a producer because he might steal our riffs, through to the cost of not being worth it, etc. So I think it's a really good one to start with for a producer roundtable. And what I can do is just explain where I come from, and then the other chaps here can chime in. So I kind of think if I'm being asked to produce a song, or I hear a band and I hear a song and I think I've got something to offer that production, I kind of look at it like it's a complete mentorship from the band room to the finished mix. And that's something I've developed over the years from working with other producers, seeing them come in here and working with bands, and then working with bands myself and learning, oh, I could have done that differently, like self-evaluating the outcome. So it really means everything to me, from working on a demo with a band, helping write lyrics, listening to the parts, right through to the mix stage. It's not like the thing that people probably presume it is the most, which is the producer just sits in the studio and says, no, go again, or do another take. I think that's the most common misconception I've discovered. So with that in mind, the second part of Chris's question, or the topic, was accelerating a band's career from chaos to clarity. I think if you took the concept of what I just described from being the complete mentorship, you could take a band, say, that's very unprepared, so let's say a single, through to being complete in, like, roughly, should we say, 6 weeks. So in that 6 weeks, an accomplished producer could actually help a band do all of those parts, the demoing, the working on the parts, the recording, the studio time, right through to the very end, the mix and the master. And what will happen is it's kind of like a quick crash course for that band into how to take something that is an idea of a song to a finished result. And they will absorb a considerable amount of that in that time, and that's the chaos to clarity. So when they go to do their next song, they've got more of an idea how to do that whole process from beginning to end. And when I was thinking about this afternoon, I actually thought of a really good analogy, or a good example was, I remember I worked with this one band, and we pretty much had to rewrite all the drums during the process of the pre-production, and it was a bit tough for the guy to play it, but we managed to get through it, a bit of drum trickery and editing. And I thought, this is going to be tough because it's a hard song to play. Then I went and watched them play at the single release, and the drummer just nailed it. And it was such a good feeling of like, okay, the band has taken the idea and was able to execute it, but they'd actually done the similar process to some of their other songs that were, because I'd heard all the songs in the pre-production stage, and they were all pretty rough, but they had learned that chaos to clarity concept and applied it to some of their other songs. So it was actually really, really good. So that's what I kind of feel a producer can do from band room all the way through to the end result.
Cool. Anyone else want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I'll say something real quick. You got to remember as well, like I think of the actual name producer, you need to produce the product. So sometimes it's not just like a skill set and trying to, direct them, but it's what do you have to do to get that product achieved and finished and out there, And sometimes you need to work with, like you said, Troy, some limitations of maybe their ability to really get that perfect performance. So you got to come up with ideas, and sometimes it's all in that pre-production, making sure they're ready for the studio and making their job easier and assisting them to get to that next level, because your name's a part of that too. You want to make it the best product you can.
Nice. Yeah.
Jump in with a little bit as well. So I think what's super important is, like, it's got to start from a place of trust. As you mentioned, Troy, some people might have this unfortunate kind of mistrust right from the get-go, and it might be from a bad experience or something. But the producer's got to really work on that right from up front, because all of the benefits of having a producer on board rely on that trust level. And there's so many different types of producer, and the band or the artist needs to really find a producer that kind of does the thing that they need to kind of slot in and help kind of bring that project to fruition. So some producers, like, you'll get in the studio and quickly track some stuff really quickly as the final part of the project, and that might be all the contact you have. But then you might find some other producers that really want to dive into the project a lot earlier and go through much more thorough pre-production kind of stuff, and then some producers will literally help train the band up for the studio. And so you've got these kind of different levels, and there's different levels of what that requires on the producer's end too. So obviously it's going to come a little bit down to the budget, how much you can have them involved, but there's different producers that can bring different things to the table. And so it is a case of figuring out what you need. But something I kind of learned pretty quickly from working with producers that were bringing value to the table is how important all of that pre-production and preparation stuff is. I think a lot of bands early on don't really respect that, or it's not about respect, they don't understand the importance of all of that pre-production stuff. I think when you're young and naive as someone in a band, you think, okay, we've got some songs that we've made, and then at some point we'll get in the studio and then a real nice version of them will be made, and there'll be that studio moment and someone will record it and it will be great. So, but all that work really comes from the arrangement and the understanding of songwriting and composition and stuff like that. So the importance of having this external person who is good at doing that, and them bringing their external perspective to the table, and it might be that they are being a bit of a tiebreaker in some cases between different ideas within the band. But that stuff is so valuable once you've gone through it and you look back and you think, oh, that's something way more bands need to experience, and unfortunately probably don't get that experience a lot of the time. So yeah, but it really comes back to that first thing of trust and figuring out who the right type of producer is for your project.
Cool. And I suppose like all of you are doing producing and engineering on a lot of your projects. In the production of the song, how do you know or make decisions when it's production versus engineering, with those hats, and also, in relation to the information, sort of the IP type side of mixing versus producing? Like Zorran, you brought that up as a point in our chat. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to get a few things right, in terms of knowing your instrument, knowing how to get the most out of your instrument, getting your thoughts, being able to get your thoughts out into music. And producers can definitely help with that as well, giving little tips on people and adjusting the way they play the guitar, way they hit the drum, etc. And I think knowing when it's which, production versus engineering comes down to knowing both of those things. You kind of have to know your production and your engineering as well, and knowing your setup, knowing your mics and everything. So you got to know when something is from the artist versus when a mic needs to be moved. So yeah, I guess experience helps with that regard.
Cool. Anyone else? Thoughts? Cool. Okay. What about if we jump on to what else have we got? Like, what's the first thing to get right when producing metal? Carrying on from one of the other things you were talking about the other day, Zorran.
First things to get right with metal. Well, I think it has to be the composition. I think it has to come down to, I think with all music in general, it comes down to like how you layer your drums, how you place one element over the other, and how all your elements sort of talk to each other, and just finding the perfect beat to go over that exact riff, trying a couple of different combinations, finding pockets to break out with each instrument group, like where the bass can shine through a little bit, where the vocals can fit perfectly without overstepping, and without being too loud, too soft. So yeah, I think the most important thing is just syncopating perfectly and just everyone talking to each other, and all the instruments sort of playing together. That's the most important thing for me.
Cool. Do you have an approach, Troy, when you're just jumping in? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, it really does depend on the genre, and it does. Then I start to do what Dave was talking about, where form that relationship with the band. So it's like, let's say it's something like technical death metal. So it's a crazy genre. So you have to let the band lead, because they would have been practicing the songs for a long time and getting them up. So it's like, let the band lead you and help you find the starting point. Sometimes it's demos. A band might have some demos, and you'll listen to them and study them and learn where they're at, and then work out, how you're even going to approach this, how you're going to record it. Is it going to be like with technical death metal? It'd probably be drums first, like most metal. But it's really more about how can you, as a producer, with your skill set and your musical experience, apply yourself to this project to help this band get their desired outcome. And like Z was saying, yeah, there's knowing your instruments, I would say, like knowing everything about everything as much as you can, so you can help each individual member of the band. I tend to have this thing where my lunchtimes I'm trying to learn something out of the box that I don't know. Like, it might be I went through snare drum tuning for like a couple of years, and now I'm on guitar cabs. So it's trying to learn all those things so you can help the members of the band get to their goals.
Cool. So I suppose with that, like I know Dave and Corey, you've worked with number of international producers as well on some of your projects. I mean, Corey, do you want to tell us about your work with Forrester, Saville and Sylvia Massy, and things you learnt from working with them that you apply to, you know, what you do, but also might be useful for, you know, to tell all the other people about?
Yeah, totally. And I think what Troy said, you know, keep upgrading your skills. Like it's important to have specialties, you know. For me, being a drummer, like Dave and, you know, some other producers that play and produce, we need to know how to achieve those sounds. So we need to be like really good at nailing certain genres and certain drum tones. And that might require some projects, alternative approach where you keep it really raw and you have a really good kind of room sound. And then other ones you might need to really blend those samples and really heavily edit everything, even guitars, you know, even vocals, and have these techniques to really get that, say, if it's a big production, that modern big sound. And then you kind of get in that one kind of fear of, am I overproducing it or am I crushing it, you know, with the master? So you really need to have these specific techniques. Otherwise you might have to bring in, you know, a mastering engineer or a mixer or something like that. But yeah, just keep getting really good at certain things that you need to be able to achieve these genres, you know.
Cool. Did Forrester have any particular tricks that you learnt off him that you use, or Sylvia?
Yeah, so by the time I worked with Forrester, I'd already worked with a lot of producers, and he was the first producer that wanted to try and test all the different snares before committing to one particular snare. And then what you'd do is you'd kind of record a pass of maybe a verse with each snare, and then each snare he would even tune to the song in the right key, and that's quite a difficult thing to do. So you really got to match the right note of maybe that, you know, kind of chord. You can choose one. It might be too low for the root notes. You have to go to the next kind of, you know, note in the scale. And only once we did every drum, we'd listen back and then decide. So that's a very long process. But saying that, that's what we did with the drums being the last thing in the chain of recording. We already had done vocals, guitars, bass, everything for the City of Souls album. And then I came in last and did the final drum tracks to already a heavily edited kind of thing. So my takes were locking in with guitars that were locked in. Otherwise, you're kind of battling between the click and maybe the instruments if they're not perfect. You know, it depends on the level of the production. If you want it really tight, you take these fine, detailed, long processes to get that result. You can't rush those really technical pieces, you know, but the raw stuff, you can experiment a little bit more, and you don't have to tune 10 snares before you commit to one, you know, just going, you know, and keep it raw.
Yeah, cool. What about you, Dave? Like when you worked with Romesh?
Yeah. First of all, did my mic just get louder?
It did.
Okay, cool. Awesome. We're
magic.
saw a button I hadn't pressed. Got too many fancy things going on. Yeah, so just in terms of general drum production and approach?
Or just anything you learnt that, you know, you apply now, or you think, you know, people should know?
Yeah, so it was quite interesting working with worked with Tom Larkin for a while, and he's a drummer, of course, and yeah, lots of making sure drums were in tune before every particular song, so tuned to every song. And he, you know, this was to the point of like get all the drums in tune with the song, and then check the tuning every 3 takes. That kind of level of like going back, mainly the snare drum, making sure that was accurately staying in tune. But the other big thing, recording drum samples, kind of soft, medium, hard for each drum, like once it's all tuned just before starting recording of the track, so that you have the ability to layer in the actual samples of the, you know, exactly how you tuned everything for that particular song with all the mics and stuff like that. So that was a big thing. But then the sort of one interesting thing about the drum recording process between a lot of recording we did with Tom and then doing this one single with Romesh was quite a different approach. With Tom, what we were doing is recording full drum takes. And generally what we'd done in pre-production is we had recorded the whole band in the room. So we had scratch takes of everything. So I was then recording drums to that, but generally whole song playthrough and then jumping in to patch up little bits and pieces here if needed. Whereas right from the start with Romesh, it might've been partly because we had time constraints, but he clearly liked working this way. We just went intro to like a couple of bars into verse 1, did that 3 times or something. And then we're like, cool, done. And then 2 bars count in, first verse to Johnston into the chorus. Did that a few times, cool, done. Next bit, basically worked through doing multiple takes of each section. And it was super fast. Like I'd never recorded like that. I'd always done sort of full takes. And so I've kind of, there's pros and cons to each of those approaches, but what I've figured out now, just depending on the resources that you have available, like if you only have a certain amount of time in the studio, it's really cool to know these different approaches for recording drums, because that other approach of just going focus on the first chunk of the song until you've got that and then move on, because it means that all the feedback you can give to the drummer about, okay, play this bit like this, maybe do this drum fill like this, they just need to remember that one bit, and you can really kind of go surgical on the details of how that's going to be played. And then you can go, cool, tick that off, next bit, and work through. And yeah, I was surprised how fast that was. And, as long as you've got good communication between the producer and the drummer, you're really just kind of smashing through it and working through it really nice and quick. So I think that's a really amazing thing as well, just working with different producers and you just pick up all these different approaches. And that's the benefit, I suppose, to having the being in a band experience working with producers too, because producers aren't often working with other producers in that same kind of context. So you might not be picking up those things, but as a musician working with different producers, everyone works differently. So you can sort of go through and like pick up these little tricks here and there.
Cool. Anyone else got any thoughts on all this?
I've got a great little quick trick that has been super beneficial to me over the years. And drummers, Dave, you'll crack up at this. That is, do your takes, however you do it in bits or full takes. Then go to the drummer and say, look, here's a pair of 2Bs. Can you just do a take and hit these drums like they're rentals? So, just beat the living shit out of them. I mean, you have to be careful if you've got more songs to do. You don't, dent the skins, but you can get a couple of takes with just the most serious sounding backbeats, because 2Bs, for people who don't know, are like potentially I like tree trunks. And I discovered this because one of my favorite drummers, who is an absolute beast, I went and sat on his kit and had a look at it, and I picked up the sticks and I was like, what on earth are these? These are like, 2Bs are so big, but he gets the best snare sound. And it's the size of the stick. So do a couple of takes on big sticks as extras. You might jump to them in the chorus, and then you've just got this power that you don't have in the rest of the song, and it really does make a difference.
I think that's a fun idea doing them last, because if I was doing them earlier, my hands would like fully cramp up playing those sticks.
Yeah, I know. You don't realize how big they are until you pick up some 7s or something else. But this guy's a machine. He's probably one of the fastest, most articulate drummers. Jacob Randall, kudos to you. He's insane. They're tree trunks.
Nice.
Now that's a good point, Troy. I'll just quickly add on that too. That's something in metal for sure you need consistency on, is that snare needs to be almost the same hit every time. And if it's metal, you need the rim shots. So that's a technique on its own. So if you've got a drummer and you have a bit of time before the studio, tell them to get their rim shots good and listen into that. And that's when maybe if it's not consistent, you'll have to do that sample blending. But yeah, you got to get them to hit that snare hard, But I like that technique, Troy.
Hit it like it's rentals. That's what I always say.
Nice. Cool. Should we jump on to, we've got our back to stuff. So should we jump on to pre-production, getting set up for success? Choosing gear. I mean, you've already got some parts of this, but yeah, Zorran, do you want to talk about how you choose gear as it start off on that?
Sure. I mean, I guess there's two parts of it. One is as a musician, even before you, think about recording and stuff like that. You have a journey. You go through shops and whatnot and try and find instruments that I feel should make you want to keep playing. If you feel like putting it down and it's like you can tell there's a bit of a disconnect there. So I feel like if you have a nice instrument that you want to keep playing, that's something. For guitar players, I'd say mess around with pickups. Try and find a great pickup that suits your playing style. For drummers, I mean, we've got a few drummers here, but change your skins. Try and find skins that really accentuate your playing. So little things like that. Even picks for guitar players make a huge difference. The thickness of your pick, the string brands is not so much, but the pick can really make a difference in the pickup. So I'd say mess around with those things, and it can really make a good difference in the final result. And basically it can just help you feel more comfortable in doing your takes, get the best out of your takes. And that's kind of such a big part of, when you put the fader up to mix it, you get a vibe straight away. So yeah, just mess around with your little parts of your setup and try and get the most out of it.
Yeah, because if you get it right when it's going in, you don't really need to EQ or compress it later on. It just saves so much time in the mix, and you know what you're getting in.
Absolutely. So you're mixing and not fixing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Got any other thoughts about that, Dave? Or
Sorry,
Troy?
I was just replying to Kiara's comment there.
Oh, cool.
But,
Oh, nice. Thanks.
yeah, I think, I'll hit enter on this in a moment. But yeah, I think, and kind of jumping back to what Corey was saying before as well about like having those instruments with you in the studio is so useful. Like the different options. Like I've done a couple of sessions where we've had maybe 5 different snare drums to pick from. And honestly, it took me like 1 minute to figure out which one I was going to use. But I was like blown away with how different, like when you actually put a bunch of snare drums beside each other, none of them sound the same as each other. It's crazy how different they sound. If you've got one snare drum, it sounds like a snare drum, But just actually going through and I was like, boom, boom, boom. I was like, there it is, done, So like being able to do that is really good because you can kind of get something that just fits the vibe of the song so quickly. And if you've only got one option for the guitar or one option for the snare drum or whatever it is, then that's obviously what you're going to work with. But it might just be a little bit more of a battle to get everything fitting in nicely. When you've got that luxury of a few, like if you're going into the studio as an artist and you can borrow a few different options, and snare drums are a big one. You don't need to do this with all of the parts of the drum kit or anything, but snare drums, and like if you're a guitarist going in, if you can bring in a few different options that you borrow from mates and stuff, it can really help because you can figure out which one fits the song quite quickly once you're sitting there with the engineer or producer by just doing a few, doing a quick take on one of them, being like, well, that one sounds way better.
Cool.
And you're making progress really fast by just picking the best out of a couple of different options. So I think that's huge. And, Zorran mentioned a bunch of other important stuff already, fresh skins, all that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, for engineers and producers who are wanting to have a selection of, say, snares or, amps or whatever, are there any places that they could easily get them? I mean, obviously going to a studio, for example, like Troy's. How many snares you got at your studio, Troy?
I don't know. Is my wife going to see this? It's probably
enough.
20
right.
or more.
Yeah.
I'm a total snare slut. It's everyone else's problem because they keep selling them too cheap, and then I can't just turn off the Facebook market page. Yeah. I think that thing with what you're getting at though is that it is really important as a producer, because if we're talking to potential producers, that to understand that you either need to find a rental company that you can delve into for sessions, or start to collect things that you like. I started renting snares before I started buying them, and that way it helped me to hear the sound that was in my mind, or towards that sound, and then do what Corey was talking about, finding the right skins and microphones and rooms. Um, like I would say a room is actually more important than the snare drum, because when you put a pretty average snare in a really good room, it still sounds amazing. You can put an amazing snare drum in a really average room and it will sound average. So that's another whole conversation. But yeah, I think it's important to start to teach yourself about the sounds that you like and how you can get them.
Cool. And then, so I'll jump into, for people that don't necessarily have access to a whole bunch of snares, maybe they live outside a main centre, or they don't have a friend that collects them because people sell them to them too cheap. What are your thoughts on drum replacement, using snares, slate trigger or whatever other, what are the ones that use, just any of the other plugins that you can use to drum replace, to give you, options in that way if you don't have access to multiple snares or other instruments?
I think it's a necessity really these days. It's not it's not your go. It shouldn't be your go-to, but it's a necessity to know any of the tools that people use to produce music. Like using drum replacements, it's no different than learning auto tune, to learning how reverb works. It's just part of especially in metal and rock. So there's a whole different so many different ways you can use the drum sample replacement. You can trigger rooms. You can obviously trigger close mics and all of that. But I think ultimately, if you start with the approach that it's going to be reinforcement and you're going to do everything you can in the session to get the best tuning, like Corey said, to the song, the right snare, and you work on that, and then you make samples as well, then you're not going to end up in a situation where, I have the phrase, and it's, the drums sound like typewriters having sex. It's just like digga 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 digga. You can't tell the difference between the kick and the snare, and it doesn't actually sound like a real drum kit. So I think you've really got to take the approach of, we're going to do everything we can to make this sound organic, and use any tool we can to make it sound organic, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Corey? As someone that also comes from the EDME type side as as.
Yeah, well, that's it. Now, a couple things. The first thing is, I guess, to do that blending. All the DAWs now have great functions. You don't need triggers so much anymore. You don't need these expensive plugins. You can literally go convert audio to MIDI. That's a great way to do it, but to get the details, make sure those velocities are varied, have the dynamics, and have the different snares that aren't every single sound is the same. So you need decent software. But yeah, you can convert that MIDI, then you can choose how much you want to blend it. But I also think, going back to the first thing we said about making sure you get it right, maybe do the research on these drummers. Make sure they're capable of these things, and let them know if they're not ready. Give them that pre-production to practice so they can turn up and they know what they're doing, and ask them, what gear do you have, So they're going for the right thing. That way you don't kind of having them show up and going, oh no, this is not what we expected. You got to make sure everyone's on the right page, and you're kind of going for something that you're, agreeing to from the very beginning,
Cool. And getting so also, it's the thing we talked about, Corey, reference tracks. If, what everyone's thoughts are on reference tracks when you bring them in to start, with the production you're working on,
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Having that clear vision is having the right reference. So before I even start, I say, what are some of your top favorite songs or albums, and do you want to sound like this, and what is it that you like about it? Because some of the songs can be completely different, and then you got to find what the vision is, and having that reference is great, because you want to match that along the whole process, not just in the mixing stage. You kind of want to have a vague idea at the very beginning what kind of snare or what kind of levels that these bands have to achieve that style.
Cool. Yeah. What do you think, Zorran?
Man, I think references are a blessing and a curse. They can definitely lead you down a bit of a rabbit hole. So I've sort of I think it's good to listen to a lot of stuff in your environment where if you can, in that whichever studio you're working in, get to know that set of speakers in that room really well. And then you just use the references sparingly. So you kind of maybe, before you start mixing, obviously references when you're talking to the band to establish the sound and the direction and stuff, that's a little bit different. Like that's using references in a slightly different way. But references in terms of mixing and stuff, I'd say you're better off using them at the start of your mix, tuning your ears a little bit, and then just sparingly using them throughout the rest of the process. Because if you use them too much, you end up mixing like the other track and not really like the thing you're working on. So yeah, just watch out for not using them too much. That's what I would say about, and make sure they're level matched,
Yeah.
to the as much as you can, like to the 0.1 of a dB to what you're working on. Sometimes even when while I'm mixing something, I'll briefly chuck a limiter on there and make sure the levels are really similar to the reference. Otherwise, you're not getting the exact accurate picture.
Yeah, Metric
But, yeah,
AB. Yeah, Metric AB is a good plugin for it'll just actually match them in the sections. So I use that all the time. So can definitely that's one of the best ones I've found for when you're using
Yeah,
references.
same here.
Yeah,
I think what Z said is really important because when you're working on a song, I always have this feeling when I feel like the song's, I call it like it's got its own legs, like it's becoming its own thing. And when you have a reference track that you're trying to copy verbatim, you're not letting the song be itself. You're suffocating the song, I guess, so you end up like guitars are always the ones for me. If I reference a song too much, I'll try and EQ the guitars to sound like this other record. And, we all know what happens when you EQ guitars too much. So it's really a really good point.
cool. What are your thoughts, Dave, on reference tracks?
Yeah, I'm big on reference tracks. I think, and also knowing what you're using them for is really, really key. 100% what Zorran mentioned, you don't want to be checking yourself against those constantly. That's kind of dangerous, but I'll have some reference tracks that I'm using as like a broader tonal thing that I just think overall the balance of the track sounds really nice. But then, like the last track I was working on as a producer and a mixing engineer with a band, right at the early stages, when we're discussing the track and the goals for the project, there, I said to them, hey, can you go away and have a chat amongst yourselves, especially because, in bands, you got multiple people with different ideas. So you want to kind of get on the same page and make sure they're on the same page early on. Otherwise, you're all chasing yourselves around in different directions. So I said, can you go away, come back with like one or two tracks that you think just sound good overall as a broad like tonal balance, and then one or two tracks where you think the drums sound approximately the type of drum sound you're looking for, and then same with guitars and same with vocals, and then see what they come back with, and just to sort of give you a picture of what they're trying to do. And then you can tell real quick if they haven't figured it out within their band, what kind of overall sound they're going for. Because just like with the talk before about samples, like there's different approaches for different genres and stuff, even just within rock and within metal. You've got the real polished sounding rock productions where clearly, the norm now is like mint sounding samples that are just being swapped in there, and then it sounds amazing. But then you've got other bands that still want to sound like a band playing in the room and a bit more of a natural sound. And in that situation, using those samples you've recorded of the exact instruments, if you need to, gives you that flexibility, but you're trying to retain that thing. And so, if you're asking bands for references early on, I think it can really help make sure that you understand what's going on and what the goals are for the project. Because yeah, it's kind of risky if you get halfway through or you send the first mix and then it's not what the client expected or whatever, you know. So it's kind of tricky there. But yeah, I'll have references for different purposes at different stages for sure.
Cool. Sweet. Let's jump on to some more gear type stuff then. Amps versus plugins. Obviously, there's a lot of amp sims out there now, and they have their uses. But you know, with all the stuff you guys do, what are your thoughts on them? What are your recommendations on them? You know, where do they fit? You know, better, or you know, for what context? You know, or you know, styles and genres. So, who wants to talk about that first? Hand up, or I'll choose.
I'll have a go.
Okay, go Troy.
So obviously, you know, there's a budget's a big part of that. Are you going to record a real amp, or are you going to try to, or are you going to use a sim? And there's some amazing software and hardware out there now. Obviously, all the usual candidates. I think it goes back to what sort of sound the band wants to get, and then that will define which fork in the road you might go down. So like if you're talking about some of the, let's say it's the more modern metal, there is like a new guitar sound, shall we say, that is coming from a particular box that everyone's sort of using. So you'd use that, and it's a ridiculously easy process. If you're, say, doing thrash, you wouldn't necessarily want to start with that box. You might want to start with a classic amp and a 57 and work your way through like that. So for me, it's always that process. What is the band trying to achieve? And then also the real big elephant in the room is, does the artist actually even have the right amp? Because quite a lot of the time they don't, and that's a delicate situation you have to work through. And what I tend to do is just let them set up, let them get the best sound they can in the room whilst I'm finishing off something else, drums, bass, etc., and then go in and have a listen, put a couple of mics on it, get it up in here and get it sounding as best you can, like work with them to get it to sound good, and then apply some of the skills as a producer to help them to get the sound over the line. And like I was saying, with learning about different snare sounds and that, it's the same thing with guitars. There's a million different guitar sounds, probably more than a million, and so many ways to get it. So you have to sort of go down that path of teaching yourself on how to get the different sounds. You know, there's everything from, I'm just thinking about what I have in here. I have a Kemper, I have a Neural DSP, I have something that Zorran actually got me onto, the 2 Notes Torpedo, which I think is insane, although I'm still learning how to use it. And I have your typical Marshall cabs and all that. So I think it just, goes back to the genre and the band, and then you work your way up from there to find your solution. It's a tough one. Guitar tones are probably the hardest thing. I don't know how you guys find it. I find it the hardest one, because I do not want to be changing that guitar sound too much. I want to wrap the whole band around that sound, and I want it on the day. I don't want to have to deal with it when I'm mixing. Like giving all the toys, you know.
See, I'm now doing the opposite, where I'm thinking of people wanting to change it later, so I'm doing everything straight in DI with these plugins, but knowing later I can reamp them, because that's another trending thing I've noticed. A lot of these producers say, we'll reamp it at the end, and then we can choose what boutique cab and what type of mic, and then it takes it to a whole nother level, but you're not locked into those options. But sometimes, like you said, Troy, it is good to lock it in, because, man, there's nothing worse than a client wanting to change it every other session, you know, and it's not ideal.
That could be weeks of tweaking. I mean, it goes without saying, always record a DI. You do. You know, in fact, most of the times I'm recording the DI, the output of the pedals, and then whatever we're using to monitor the tone, you know, the amp sim or the cab or whatever. Yeah, and that's a really important point too, because you do need to change the sound. Most of the times, you tend to, I find you easily overcook it when you're tracking. You're setting up too much gain or too much something, and then when you go to mix, you don't actually need as much. Yeah.
Cool. Zorran, you got any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, sure. I kind of feel like the guitar tone, especially for metal, it's kind of like the voice of the band. I mean, let's say apart from the snare drum, which is also kind of the voice of the band in a way, the guitar tone has such a big effect on like the emotion that kind of comes across. And I guess being a guitar player myself, from the time I was quite young, I was curious about what these people were using, and right from the days of the guitar mags and everything, before we had the internet. Yes, I mean there was such a time, but yeah, knowing what your favorite artist used, like let's say you hear something and you kind of go and research, and then it's good to know what those artists were using and what kind of sound, what kind of vibe those guys were going for. So now, when we go back to those references and stuff where people are sort of thinking like, oh yeah, we love the sound of this record, I'll quickly have an idea of, okay, this sounds like a 5150 with a vintage 30 speaker with this kind of cab, and that kind of thing. So I'll kind of have a rough ballpark already. And if the artist has got something that's quite different, quite far off, we'll set, like what Troy said, we'll set up what they have, and then I'll be like, here, what do you reckon about this? And we'll record a bit of both, and then I'll A/B it, do a blind test, and then sometimes that's plug-in versus amp. I'll be like, we'll just try stuff just to see how the vibe changes, and then sometimes I might go back to the amp setup and tweak the amp accordingly. But yeah, with amps and with guitar tones in general, like recently I've starting the mix with the guitar tone, because how often have you mixed the drums in and put the guitars in and the drums are not right? So the guitars change and eat up so much stuff. They're kind of like white noisy almost. So I find mixing the drums against the guitars, at least for a little while, makes a huge difference and almost makes drum mixing a little bit easier.
Cool.
Mm.
I remember speaking of things like amp simulators and things like that on guitars. We've got the people from United Plugins have given us the Electrum, mother of all guitar amps plugin. We've got 2 copies to give away, so we're going to give one away at the end from the people that registered for this and have been on the actual stream. So if you stay till the end, you can be in to win that. And yeah, we've got a second copy that we'll draw in the next couple of days from someone that also registered for the this talk. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, okay, let's jump on to, because I'm mindful of time, studio setups, room acoustics and things like that. Troy, do you want to have a little talk about this, because I know you're big into room acoustics, and this is one thing you brought up with me previously. So yeah, the role of the room and using the room as an instrument, in producing.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if we're talking about live rooms or how you're recording, and it's funny, we were just talking about guitars because like if you want something to sound big, I'm trying to think about how to explain this with room acoustics. Like if you want something to sound big, sticking a microphone right in front of it's not actually going to make it sound big. And a lot of the stuff I've discovered with recording in rooms have actually been happy accidents, like a microphone turned around the wrong way without realizing, and tracking like a whole day of guitars and it sounding like the best guitar sound I've ever heard that I've ever done. And then when I locked up, noticing that bless his soul, the assistant that I had actually put the 414 around the wrong way and it was facing into the room. So I think the optics of things, like how things look, are not the way to set things up. Like really use your ears. Like if you feel like something is too tight or too bassy, don't go for EQ, like go for the mic, like move the mic, things like that. I think the other really important thing too is that when you go to mix, if you've got some room in your sound, it actually makes your job so much easier. It's so much easier to place a guitar or a bass, or drums, obviously, when they've got some kind of room on it. Even if it's like I can hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, but my room's not very good." It doesn't actually matter. Like it will still create a sound. And I always go back to like the Queens of the Stone Age analogy. Like some of the drum sounds on those records are so good, and they're disgusting sounding rooms when you really think about it and you listen to it. They've compressed them almost inside out and done some really gnarly things. So I think if you want to make your job easier as a producer, like experiment with rooms and try different things, and don't always be like close mic and done. Like have some fun.
Yeah. Do any of you guys, when you're miking up, like drums, use in-ear monitors for that? I know Andy Lovegrove used to come in and do stuff here. That's how he would do get a lot of his drum sounds, was he'd have in-ear monitors sending, and he'd just stand there with the drums and the guitar cabs and just move it all around that way. So yeah, rather than have, say, an assistant there or running backwards and forwards. Do you guys have any particular tricks or techniques just to get the sound that you think's best nice and quickly?
I do have one technique that because for me, I'm doing a lot of production in my studio, so I just know that sound very well, and these techniques can be applied elsewhere, but obviously the rooms change. And one thing I like to do is almost fake the room in such a sense, where I put a kind of room mic in the corridor, and I have that corridor slightly opened up from a door that's not fully closed, so the sound's bleeding in, muffling, and I'll get this really cool sound. And then I'll add a ton of, I like to plug in Tora Reverb, and I put a cathedral on there, and it's like huge. And then I'll notice, because it is the room mic, there's an offset, so the phase is like not perfect. And then I'll kind of move that around, that track, until I get it sounding cool. And then I've almost created this massive sound that I don't even have. And it tricks the listener to think, wow, that's like huge, So you can do little tricks like that.
Nice. You got any thoughts on this, Dave, in particular?
I liked your idea that you just said then, Chris.
Right.
But probably not so much in terms of miking and, well, no, it is in terms of miking and room mics and stuff, but like a happy accident that I had in last session that I was on, it was recording at the lab, was we mostly basically didn't use any samples recording the drums, because it was a nice sounding room, and the way that we had pre-produced it and stuff, and the way that the drums were being hit, the snare had a nice crack to it, didn't need to use snare samples, the consistency was all there. Awesome, cool stuff. Maybe used some tom samples, because you want to get rid of those cymbals to like sort of just blend into your real toms, which you can do if you've obviously tracked the samples immediately before, because it's all tuned the same. But the one thing I sort of tried out, and it worked super well, was but just to get the snare sounding bigger. Again, I wasn't really changing the snare direct mic. It's funny how you actually need to be working with the kit as a whole, or the room mics, to get the snare sounding bigger. It's not just a case of, like, if anything, turning up just the direct mic's probably not going to do the job. And what I kind of did and worked a charm was used just a sample of the room mics. It was kind of a blend of the whole couple of further away mics of just the snare being hit. So it was basically a snare sample, but it was only the room mic. And so what that meant was you've just got all of this beautiful decay from the really nice recording studio room from the snare. And then so I basically mapped that all out to all of the other main snare hits and blended it in slightly. So you're actually just blending in a sample of the room each time the snare's getting hit, and then killed the transient on all of the snares, because I didn't want the transient adding to the, stacking up to the snare sound, but just that adding that clean decay with no other drums in on top of the snare and you don't need to crank it up heaps, but it just really brought out that kind of atmosphere. And, you know, it's obviously a real pleasure when you get to record drums in a beautiful room, and being able to kind of use the room is great, rather than just all these kind of direct mics. But it just ended up being this little technique I figured out on the spot, and I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to use this again. So yeah, hopefully that made sense. It was a bit of a mumbled answer.
Nice. Cool. Just got a question here through from Tim, just about some of the stuff we were talking about. It says, I love using both mediums, or capturing the performance through an amp and then layering the DI split with plugins. How do you all approach rhythm layers, creating width with multiple guitars? Who wants to go on that? Zorran, you can have a turn. How do you get width with guitars?
Well, I mean, goes without saying, pan hard left and hard right for starters. But then, you know, for things like the choruses and stuff, just adding another couple. But on those extra guitars, you can find out what it really needs, what the song needs there. So often enough, it's kind of a slightly less gainy, like a sound with less gain on it can make the chorus really huge, or whatever that breakdown is. Another trick I really love is an octave down. Like you can have an octave pedal, or even if it's only the octave, you know, you can blend that in to like breakdowns, and they just sound absolutely crushing when you do that. So, but with, you know, one thing you can do for width is you can use a slightly different guitar sound on each side, but that makes it sound a bit more live or raw and less like perfect or produced. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you're going for something like Slipknot, that could work super well. But if you're going for something a bit more like Alice in Chains or something like that, then that's probably not the best approach. So yeah, with layering a couple of extra things in certain parts, maybe using a slightly different guitar on those parts as well, and maybe you're using something like a stereo expander or a stereo widener on those layers, not on the main ones. It shouldn't technically need that on the main, but yeah, if you can just use it on the layers, it can really make those sections pop.
Cool. Do you have a particular stereo widener preferential plugin? Or just whatever's
Not
on hand?
really. I've got a few, but a couple that I end up coming back to is Soft Tube's layers. Mm-hmm. And I'm a bit of a junkie for this kind of plugin and even saturation plugins, but with this one, Soft Tube layers is super cool. And I kind of like it more than the Eventide stuff or the micro shifts and stuff. And another one is the Waves ADT. I love that one as well.
Cool.
And both of these are also useful for taking a mono and making it into a stereo. So if you only have like a little lead guitar that's played once, but you want it to fill out more space, you run something like these on them, and it can make it sound stereo and double tracked almost. But you have the just the one performance, but it takes up more sides on your speakers.
Yeah, the isotope widener that comes in their mastering setup is really good as well. It just doesn't fuck with the phase. So
cool.
Yeah, that's one I found that's really good. Got one more quick question. Sorry. Go, Troy.
There's a really, really good free one, which I thought's worth pointing out for all of the people on budgets. It's called Mongoose, and it's like a crossover with a widener, so you can keep which is really important for guitars. You can keep there's a slider, and the left-hand side's all the low end, and it keeps that mono, and everything on the right is what you're widening. So you can literally just sit there and find the sweet spot where you're keeping the mono content of those guitars solid, and then you're widening everything above that. And it's free, but it just sounds great. It's nice. A really good one for overheads as well.
Cool. Got one.
Sorry, Chris. Just before we move on, something I just want to talk about around the widening and guitars and stuff. I've got like a real. I love big guitar sounds, and you know, there's nothing more cool than just having a big wall of sound kicking in if it's done right. But and this kind of goes to what I think Troy and Zorran were both saying around sometimes not having things quite as high gain as it might sound, you know, works well into the mix if it's slightly lower. But also I'm really sensitive to like the kind of harsh 3.5 to 4K frequency stuff. Sometimes guitarists will just play, and when it comes through, it's got this noise band that is just like, constant and no dynamics. It doesn't matter what note you're playing, it's like, like doesn't change. And I've got like a real kind of sensitivity to that, and I'm not a fan. And like, if you turn that up, it's painful to listen to, right? But what you can do is, if you turn it up, and then if you find that spot and you can dip it out a little bit, you can like turn it up a bit more without it being painful again. And you can get, as you sort of take out some of those harsh frequencies, you got to obviously be careful because you're changing the tone. But once it's stacking in with cymbals and everything, there's just too much of that stuff. So like, carving some out allows you to like turn the guitars up more. And I feel like that part of the sound is never wide sounding. So again, if you're carving that out, you're able to turn guitars up more, and it sounds like it's here rather than this kind of blended sound that's kind of just shoved in with all of the cymbals and everything. So just like, like kind of balancing things out with what you're carving out with some of those harsher frequencies that are not related to the actual notes that are being played, can be really good for just helping kind of bring width and space to the mix as well.
Cool. Just got another question from Ruben. It says, who favors using a DI box for the direct guitar signals versus using a preamp with appropriate impedance? DI boxes can have extra transformer harmonics versus more plain and crisp without that. Anyone want to answer that?
I'll have a go if no one wants.
Go on, you started.
Okay. I think it's an important thing to point out is that a DI box will load your pickups quite differently to a high Z input on an interface. And a lot of interfaces in preamps, not so much preamps, but a lot of interfaces, those are kind of marketing afterthoughts. So it's really important to get a really good DI that's going to get the most out of your pickups. And I've done a lot of experiments with recording mostly basses of different DIs and different high Z inputs and different preamps, and and it's night and day when you listen to a really good DI and then a cheap one, on the difference for especially for a bass. Like a bass will actually extend a lot lower on a good DI, and when you reamp that or put that through an amp sim, it's a huge difference. And then there's the whole stacking thing. If you're using a cheap, I'll say cheaper interface with an input, and you record, say, I don't know, 8 guitars, and that DI has a certain response, or sorry, that the way you're recording it has a certain response, and you stack them up, you just end up with this noise. And in fact, I almost can pick what interfaces people are using these days when a mix comes in. I can get a Focusrite 9 out of 10 times based off the sound of the recording, especially for DIs. Yeah.
With DIs, Luke Finlay and I, for the gearshoot.com site, did a big shootout of DIs. So if you want to just see how much difference there is in DIs from a cheap one up to a real fancy one, just jump onto that and do the DI shootout, because it's, as Troy said, it's pretty apparent that you get a good DI and it makes a massive difference. So nice one. Going to jump us on to mixing, a bit more mixing stuff, jumping from the guitars to that. Some of the other techniques, and this is one especially for that Dave brought up, and also I think Corey, about making your tracks sound massive without them turning into mud. So uses of techniques like unmasking, smart EQ techniques. But Dave and I were talking about all the new unmasking plugins. So go, Dave.
Cool. Yeah. Everyone will have some thoughts here, I'm sure. But one of the things that we chatted about, Chris, was that I feel like some of the newer plugin technology that might have started off being made for more like electronic-y stuff has perhaps benefited rock music the most in terms of the mixes. Like, pop music and electronic music, it's always been quite quite wide and open sounding, and anyone that's mixed rock and then also mixed like a pop track or electronic music, there's just such a difference in terms of the mid-range information, you know, like you've got all this space and like nicely separated things going on in electronic and pop music, and in rock everything's trying to be everywhere all at once, you know. It's like it's like this battle for constant everything, particularly in the mid-range. And I feel like in the last sort of maybe 5 to 10 years, like some of the tools that have come out, particularly around things like unmasking, and now we've got all this stuff like the sort of spectral dynamic stuff, which is dynamically pulling down harsher frequencies or whatever you're trying to do with it as the song goes. And sometimes, you know, if you're sidechaining that between different instruments and things like that, you can, in rock music where you've got heaps of density between the instruments, if you can have them kind of dynamically like gluing into each other with those kinds of tools now, I feel like it's kind of really enabled mixes, like just some of the kind of recent rock and metal mixes that have come out from, you know, everything from the likes of like the Sleep Token stuff, but also like the Turnstile, like the last Turnstile record. I haven't really listened to the new one, but the last one, you know, when I first heard a couple of those mixes, I was like, whoa, these mixes are epic sounding. Like everything just sounds mean. And I feel like, yeah, some of these new tools like unmasking stuff and sort of side chain, like intelligent side chaining kind of stuff, has really enabled dense stuff to kind of still sound big all at once and like being able to clearly hear all parts of the mix. So that's kind of what we were talking about, Chris, and it'll be interesting to hear what some of the other guys here think about that and that problem of density.
Yeah, Corey, as another guy who does a lot of stuff as well as in rock and metal, does EDM. Do you want to jump in on this?
Well, that's it. Like you said, Dave, like side chaining was kind of not really anywhere used but in electronic music. And now it's like the best thing to make sure that snare cuts through. But there's so many details you need to do with that. Like I always create my own sidechain channel with a very small ghost snare that's almost to the point where it's like releases straight away. You don't want to pull it down for too long. And sometimes when you do these masters and you start crushing things, you can really hear that ducking. So like you said, you need to use it in an intelligent manner. But then I like to also create the big wall of sound by having, say, a guitar lead, or I think one of the most similar things is the main chorus vocal, having those two very clean up in the middle. And that is side chaining a more bigger, wider reverbed one. So then you get that nice tail and big sound, but then that vocal is cutting through. But then you've got to almost decide, well, how do I also share the load between the side chain of the snare, kick, and the vocal? So you got to get that right as well, you know. And it's a lot of stuff you don't realize until it goes to the master and starts getting crushed. So like Z says, put that limiter on quite early to test it, so you're not surprised when it gets to the last stage and, oh, that's jumping out heaps, or oh, that's too heavy, or you know. But also making room with also cutting out a lot of low end on maybe the kick, saving a bit of that low end for the bass, cutting out a hell of a lot of low end for the of the guitars, you know, to clean it up, to make room for the snares and everything else, making those pockets and not relying all on sidechain, but EQs as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good plugins out. I mean, Isotope have just updated all their unmasking stuff and also including it in their Aurora reverb, which you can get really nice results out of that. Just, you know, that the mid-range mud that sometimes can come from reverb. Yeah, it's really good. Zorran or Troy, what other thoughts do you have? Do you use much unmasking in your productions or mixes?
Yeah, well, I sort of use these tools. Like I've got you know, track spacer, and there's even stuff like your usual EQ and like your soothe and stuff that you can feed sidechains into, and they duck stuff. But I kind of like to use them in almost like a reverse engineering sense. So if I let's say the bass and the kick drum are conflicting, if I feel like they're conflicting, I'll try one of those plugins to see what it's kind of doing, and then do it manually on the actual track, as opposed to feeding the kick into it and having it duck only when the kick hits. I'll just try and fix that problem on the actual track that it's needing. And I kind of feel like, I guess it kind of comes down a bit to the direction that the band's going for. If they're going for something a bit more old school, maybe that's not the right tool. So I feel like, yeah, I'll use it to find the problem in a sense. And I almost used to do this when I first discovered this thing about the side chaining. And it's almost like having a second set of speakers, that when you first get it, you check on the second set, and then after a while you find you don't need that second set anymore, because you've kind of learned the thing that it's trying to tell you that's different from your main speakers. So just in the same way, this is telling me where the problem is, and then I'll try and fix it with EQ or multiband or dynamic EQ. Then the rare, I find I usually go for stuff like this when it's not recorded ideally, which can be a lot, but I honestly use it about 10-20% of the time. And I try and see what it's telling me and then do it other ways. So yeah.
Cool. What about you, Troy? Got any thoughts on this aspect of mixing?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are, we're just so lucky that we're in a time where plug-in technology has come down to a level where people can code it without massive infrastructure, like a massive business. Like, a lot of these plugins are being made by quite small manufacturers, like 3 people. I mean, obviously there's waves and all that, but we're just in this, I think we're just at the beginning of what we're going to see in the next 5 years, of people making tools that we need, as opposed to larger institutions making plugins that are just clipping the ticket of another brand or something like that. So it's an amazing wheel. But yeah, I definitely use it. I'd probably use it more like Z does. A Bloom's a really good one that I use a lot.
Yeah.
I find that just gets stuff over the line quite fast. It's funny because sometimes you'll use your Luddite approach. You'll put a compressor on, you'll put an EQ on, and you'll be like, yeah, okay, turn it off, put on Bloom, just turn the knob up, and you're like, why didn't I do that first, man?
Yeah, I find that that's one thing I really like about Bloom, because I generally try and mix with analog, but if I've got something in the box and I want it to set, that seems to make it sound analog, way more than most
especially
other
if you
plugins.
need it on a lot of tracks. Like, say you get, I just used it on a record where we had, I don't know, a dozen vocals, and you can just get the sound you want and just duplicate it across all the tracks, and you've very quickly got it to sound bright and doing everything that you need. And it's an amazing tool. But it's fantastic.
Cool. We'll jump on to a couple of other like cross-genre tools for rock and metal production. Again, come back to Dave. Do you want to talk about some of the other cool ones that you've used, like Devious Machines, Shaperbox, and how that's useful?
Yeah, the Cable Guys.
Cable. Yeah, so we've got Devious Machines and Cable Guys, Shaperbox. Sorry.
Yeah, Shaperbox is Cable Guys. Shaperbox is, I reckon, is just like a. Have you guys used that before? Shaperbox.
Yeah.
It's just like, people don't know about it. It's the most epic tool. And it's basically like an LFO type interface. So the simplest version of thinking about it is like a volume LFO, where you can shape the volume across a rotation, but you can also so basically you could have it so every kind of bar or beat, it turns down as it goes across and then resets up like an LFO. Except with Shaperbox, you can, specifically number 3, you can also trigger it so that this shaper starts with every MIDI hit, if you're using MIDI, or more recently with audio triggering. So basically what you can do is you can have, for example, one use that I use it for is just basically shaping the ADSR of a signal, like percussive stuff. For snare drums, for example, you can have it so every time a snare hits, it will start this kind of this graph, and you can just have it like turn down So basically you could shorten the tail of a snare drum really precisely, and every time the snare gets hit, you can do that. And you can get so precise on it and just really shape it up. I think that's quite often a really useful thing, especially for kick drums and stuff as well. So you can, if you've got like a kick drum and and it's a bit boomy sounding, you can just shape that down. And it's also a multi-band tool, so you could have it so that there's still a bit of a, whatever else you're trying to get out of it in the roomy sound. But then if you want to get rid of some of the low end mud or whatever it is, just shape the back end of it. So as like a shaper, an ADSR shaper tool, it's amazing, and it can work dynamically. So harder hits and softer hits are sort of affected differently. But then it can do the same thing with like distortion and reverb and like phasey stuff. So it's got all these multi effects, but all of them can be controlled based on input signals from an audio thing. So it's just an incredible tool, and it's not that expensive. And I don't really hear anyone else talking about it. I don't think heaps of people know about it, but like I've used it. It's just in my go-to plugins list for the last few years, just the amount of precise sort of sound shaping that you can do using this one plugin. And I think it's one of those examples that kind of comes across. I think most people using that plugin are making like electronic music, and hip hop and stuff like that. But it's like I used it on shaping snare drum and stuff for the last rock track I worked on, and it's just so good at doing that. So yeah, some of these tools that I think you can pinch from other genres and stuff like that, it really can kind of help out. And there's been some really cool ones recently. I don't think Cable Guys is a massive company either, so it's probably goes into that.
Yeah, and they also do another plugin, Snapback, which is used like for snares, and you can put a little reversed snare or just a little any sound and you go zip into it, and you can do heaps of manipulation with, say snare sounds or anything, but it just gives all this extra snap and crack. So I've been finding that's a real go-to for me. Just it makes things really easy on the mix. So you got any favorite plugins, Corey?
Ooh, I do like what the Fab Filter stuff. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I still don't even have a proper version of that. I need to get that one.
Cool, yeah. The Fab Filter stuff's handy for what Zorran was talking about, where you can connect the two tracks and you can see where the frequencies are overlapping or clashing, so you can deal to it. So yeah, but yeah, they always have been doing a lot of good stuff. Cool. We've got like 8 minutes left, so probably jump on to a couple of other things. Pitfalls and lessons. Troy, I'll get you to jump in on this one because you brought it up. What are common problems you find with delivered sessions for mixing, and how do you avoid them? Just a quick little thing because we've got 8 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is coming from being given sessions from bands as opposed to producers, but producers can definitely take a little bit on board if they haven't done this. And probably the most common thing I get is it'll be a vocal or a guitar track that's the whole length of the song. And it's like vocals and guitars especially should be split into the discrete parts of a song so that you can at least balance your whip, your work in progress mix, or your rough mix up. I think, we've got limitless tracks now. It's not a hard one to just put it onto a different lane, put a bit of reverb on it different to the verse, and start to kind of help shape the song. It's always a pet peeve that either myself or Ryan, the chap that works here, has to cut. We have to sit here and cut everything up and basically, 2 steps backwards to go 1 step forward. So I think it's a really good thing to get into the habit of caring about your session and arranging the song. You'd be surprised. It's probably like 75% of the stuff that comes in is like that.
Yeah. What about you, Zorran? Do you get many mixes sent through to you, or stuff to mix and then have to deal with the session?
Yeah, I do. I'd say about half my work is that, where I get sent stuff to mix. But I try to not. I try and be the problem solver. see what I can do to sort of fix it myself. And then, if I feel like if everyone was an expert, then I'd be out of a job. So I try and be a bit forgiving about their, any errors that they make, and I'll have a yarn to them, and just talk to them about stuff like that for next time. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do post to fix stuff. So I try and use all those tools when I can.
Sweet. Corey or Dave, you got anything about that for when you get delivered sessions? Corey's going for the mic.
Yeah, just make sure they give it to you in the right format. Like everything needs to be labeled ideally. Get them to also maybe send a reference too, if they've got an idea. And just make sure, it's like minus 60 dB on those main ones, and nothing's like kind of too noisy, like otherwise you're going to have to, like Z said, do a lot of fixing and a lot of gating and stuff like that. So it's good to have those tools just in case. And maybe if you are working with this producer over time or this engineer, just tell them for next time, watch out for this. And I noticed there's these things going on, but also say it in the most professional manner. You don't want to be criticizing them and then, ruining more potential work with them. So obviously working together to get the best, product.
Cool. And I suppose also when you're getting sessions, sometimes when people have lots of automations of volume faders, and then if you've got to try and, sort out your own gain structure. I was talking to Zorran about this the other day as well, as working out an approach. But my personal thing is ideally if they're doing volume automations, it can get a bit tricky because I've either got to bounce those out with what they did or check it, work out a different way to do it with gainers and things like that. You had a good workaround for that, Zorran, where you just like bounce the volume automated track out and then adjust it from there.
Yeah, I mean, if it's reasonably okay, if there's nothing too sort of wrong about it, I'll take it as that's how they're sort of hearing it, or that's how they kind of want to hear it. So, and of course, if it's just like gain levels, just volume levels, that's sort of also easy enough to do from our end as well. So yeah, in general, if they send me, I'll always tell people this as well when they send me stuff to mix. If they really like an effect of something, you can send me both, or send me the bounced one of the thing that they like. They can print it and then send it to me if there's a certain cool effect somewhere. They can send me both. But for what you're saying, if they've already done the automation, I think I would just bounce it. And
yeah, cool. Okay, we're going to go on to the very last things. We've got 3 minutes left, which is a question from Dave Rhodes about mastering, which is basically how do you deal with mixes for mastering that are sent through with limiters on them. So Troy and I do a fair bit of mastering, so I'll jump in first and then pass to Troy. I always like to get both versions, and so often people will do that. If someone slammed it into a limiter, it just gets really tricky. You don't have much headroom to work with, the way you're going to push it into the analog gear, and it's it can just sound a bit crunchy or gritty. So I try and get both versions off them, but sometimes for whatever reason all they've got is a version that's heavily limited. Sometimes RX can deal with that a bit if it's not too much, but you just got to make do. What are your thoughts, Troy?
I definitely ask for it without, but I wonder if Dave's asking because he's thinking about he's provided a mix and it's got a bit of limiting on it, and then the whole argument of volume. So I think that it's almost a dead argument with Spotify and LUFS, and really you've got to listen to it and say, okay, are they just doing that to give it more energy in the quieter sections? And potentially you might be looking at automating the mix to get you that same effect. As a general rule, I just say turn everything off and then check your mix. Like check it before you send it through, because it's very easy to send a mix through without checking it, and it's actually got clicks or pops. As you probably know.
Cool. Well, I reckon we'll pretty much call it at that. Now we need to do the draw for the first of our 2 United plugins. Electrum, mother of all amps, from people that registered. Oh, we've got 24 people on waiting, it seems. So the winner tonight will be, spin, Tim Heringer. Well done, Tim. You are the winner. We'll get in touch with you. And you've got to let us know how it goes. Put a little picture of yourself using it so we can send it to them. And we'll do a draw for someone else probably tomorrow or something. But thanks everyone for your time. And that was our first attempt, our first go at one of these. So cheers. Any last final words?
Just well done, Chris, for this exemplary effort at hosting the chat. And well done to the MPG team for actually making this run technologically. Pleasure to be part of it.
Crikey. And thanks to Jesse and Teresa for all their hard work on the back end as well. So we'll call it quits there and say good night to everyone. I think you got anything to say, Troy, Corey, Zorran? We'll just wait.
Go watch New Zealand music.
Yes. Cool. Okay. I'm going to stop it now on the thing.
Cheers.